Hello there, kia ora. Welcome to another live stream, which is something I'm thinking I'm going to do every month because there's no stress at all involved with it whatsoever. But I want to welcome everybody who is out there in the chats at the moment. I can see we've already got a few comments there. I see we've got somebody all the way from the Philippines who is our very first person to comment. So I guess daylight savings has thrown a few people out, I guess. Who knows? So tonight I've got a couple of very different things for you. Originally, I actually wanted to talk about three very specific topics. I wanted to talk about cuts to the disability sector. I wanted to talk about the new way that ECE was being financed and the complicated mess that was required for parents to have to get a refund for that, cutting red tape by making more red tape for everybody else. And I wanted to talk about proposals for public transport. But I came across a really interesting issue, particularly around public transport, in that I approached 28 people to come on the show tonight to talk about this particular issue. Now, some of them had some things that they couldn't deal with, some were time zone problems, but the majority of them said the same thing because they work in the field. They said that they didn't want to talk because they're a little bit concerned about what was going to happen, what was going to be seen, and what happens when the media pays attention to them. And that's a bit of a concern. So we're going to actually talk to Michael Bain a little bit later, who's been working in the media industry for 20 plus years. He's done some publicist stuff. He's worked with broadcast media, and now he's doing some work on some PhD stuff. He's also worked with a bunch of politicians, particularly after Cyclone Gabrielle last year. So he's got a really interesting insight, and we'll deal with him in about half an hour. First up, though, I've got an interview with Blake Forbes-Gentle. Now, Blake is a disability advocate, and this is a pre-recorded interview. Blake has some issues with eye contact as well, so make sure when you're watching this, you kind of understand where you're coming from. Blake is also in the comments section at the moment, so if you've got any questions for Blake, feel free to pop them in the comments section. I know he's very happy to sit there and answer questions for you. And good evening to everybody showing up. My God, everybody's showing up. It's great. It's fantastic. I've got Sam here now. If you didn't realize this, Sam was actually on the news the other night comparing his tax cut to Chupa Chups, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Great work, Sam. Very, very good. What do we got here? Former national government. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So also don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you tell people about what's going on. This episode is going to be available afterwards on YouTube and Facebook, and it's going to be released as a podcast as well. So if you prefer to listen to it as a podcast, you can certainly do that. And I'm going to try and answer questions as I go along. But the first thing I'm going to do is start this interview with Blake. Also, I don't know if you guys picked up on this. Blake has his own podcast as well, the BFG podcast. In the description, I think it's actually both on YouTube and Facebook, is a link to an interview he did recently with former Director General of Health, Sir Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. And I never know which order to put those titles in. But it is an absolutely fantastic thing to sit down and have a watch. It's really insightful. So after this, feel free to follow that link, go have a listen and have a watch. It's really, really interesting, some of the stuff you learn about behind the scenes with Ashley. Now, this particular interview is around the disability sector. Earlier this month, the government announced rather drastically and very quickly that apparently the Ministry for Disabled Peoples had no money left. So people weren't allowed to apply for things that they were going to apply for. Penny Simmons, who is the minister in charge of this particular ministry, she's gotten up in the House a number of times and she's made a whole bunch of hearsay comments around what people are spending the money on. Things like getting your nails done or overseas travel or massages, which is part of the process sometimes for people who care for those with disabilities. And it feels like a lot of fear-mongering going on and very much pointing the finger and trying to blame the victims in this case. As a result of this debacle, though, the minister has kind of had her powers pulled back a little bit, and the decision-making process kind of moved away from her and given more into the hands of cabinet, and that's not a good sign in itself. But what's more important in this conversation is just how much it impacts the people at the end of the chain, those people who are dealing with disabilities who need the help of the ministry. Now, as I said before, this is a pre-recorded interview, and there's actually a bit at the end of this that I was umming and ahhing about keeping in around Starjam, and because we recorded this before Starjam actually met their sort of funding goal that they were after, but they were an organization that had run out of funding as well and were raising funds, and I believe you can still do that. I have to double check during the interview. So sit down, enjoy this interview with Blake. Don't forget, if you've got questions for him, please pop them into the comment section. He'll be there to answer them tonight. So he's going to be far better to answer these sort of questions than I am. In the meantime, here is the interview. Gentle is here with me tonight. He's a disability advocate. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Blake?
So, hi, I'm Blake, as Paul said. I'm just starting up my disability advocacy again after a little bit of a break. I also do a tiny bit of journalism. I have my own podcast, and I do political commentary for various outlets as well. I just want to make it clear before we begin that it doesn't matter the party I support, the subject that we are talking about here, I would be advocating for, regardless of what party was in government, and it doesn't matter what party it would be, I would still be advocating because it's a subject that's not very good for the disabled community, and I need it to be advocated for regardless. So this is not based on what party I support or what party I don't. I do it in general. So I just wanted to get that out there before we begin.
Fair enough, and thank you for that. And I should point out to anyone watching this, if they haven't seen it yet already, your last interview that you did with the former Director General of Health, Sir Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, I always get those mixed up, absolutely brilliant. So what I'll do is I'll put a link in the description so people can have a look at it as well, because it's a really fun, interesting, fascinating video. So, and I'm a little jealous. I'd love to sit down and have a chat to him.
Would you like a bit of backstory, or do you want to say that?
Absolutely. How was it? How did something like that come about?
So I approached him about 6 months ago. So it took about 6 months to get it done because he's a very busy man.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend who I did the podcast with, he is the CEO of a hospice, but he does bit of media on the side, and with me. And initially, I said to him, "Hey, do you want me to get this interview and we can do it as a seminar for your staff?" And he was like, "No." And I said, "How would you like to do this?" And he said to me, "Oh, just a regular interview that we usually do will be fine, and I'll share it with my colleagues, etc." So I thought, fine. Spent months and months setting it up, and yeah, he was really cool, and really nice guy, really intelligent, really, really, really fascinating. When you watch the interview, people listening here will be quite interested because he revealed a lot of stuff, and I'm sure Paul can vouch for this, that you weren't expecting to hear, that you didn't hear from the mainstream media. And some of it was actually quite surprising. Would you agree, Paul?
Oh, absolutely. It was incredibly insightful to see and hear what was going on behind the scenes, like both in his personal life and sort of how he dealt with it professionally. It's a lot of stuff that I don't think people actually think about when they see him on TV every day, and the role that he had to fill while we were going through the height of the pandemic.
So all I would say, if you're a Bloomfield supporter, this may sway your opinion.
That's a really good way of looking at it, actually. That's a really good way of looking at it.
After you listen to this may give you a different perspective. But I'll let you guys watch it and see what you think. And we'll crack on with what I'm here to talk about for the show. So the reason I'm here is because, unfortunately, this coalition government that we do have had decided to blindside a particular community, and I just can't understand how a minister can kick a particular community to the curb. Now, I know we got Ryan Tamaki and his issues with the rainbow community and etc., etc. But to me, this is a new low. I'm really unimpressed about this. You know, painting bridges is one thing, but the cutting a group's funding and cutting them completely to the curb, no matter what government you are, as I said earlier, is something else.
The announcement on the funding changes was really instant. It was put out on Facebook basically saying, from now on, this is what's happening, without any consultation. What was the feeling from the people that you know, that you've worked with from within the sector?
So I have a lot of friends who are advocates and have people with disability, obviously. And the advocates and connections that I spoke to were just shocked, stunned, and heartbroken. I had one of my personal therapists in tears at my house.
That's got to be heartbreaking. I don't think I've come across any response that agrees with the methodology that this government's put in place for this particular issue and around this funding issue. Has there been any consultation since the announcement?
I haven't started back yet, so I can't comment on that as such. But from what I've heard, there's just a lot of displeasure, unfortunately. But I should get to know more in a few weeks when I start up what we'll get into shortly. But not at the moment, to my knowledge.
So let's talk a little bit about your advocacy that you want to do. What is your ultimate aim?
So to try and hold the government around to account around two separate issues. So the main one is the funding, but the other one is along with Penny Simmons, is it, who's the disability minister? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's one issue. That's the main issue. But the other issue, even though it doesn't affect me because I'm following the right criteria currently, we're going to also advocate for those people who are about to lose their transport discount and try and talk with Simeon Brown, Minister Brown, I beg your pardon, to see if we can get him to change his tune around the change it, because even though it's great that our total mobility people get to keep it, you know, it'd be great if the student people or the or the community service card holders and on and on and on get to keep it too, that don't currently under this new proposal.
If they change
So
the transport laws, like to the transport pricing, is that because of the funding to the Ministry of Disabled Peoples, or is that because of the transport funding
no,
in general
no,
that the government pulled back?
no, it's to do with the funding that was brought in for that, subsidy under the previous Labor government
Okay,
that they're
that makes sense.
cutting.
Do you get an impression that the ministers realise the impact of the decisions that they've made?
The two ministers, or Minister Brown or Minister Simmons?
I'd say the two ministers, because I think they're both a bit different in how they look at the world.
I think in this particular issue, they're both out of touch, and they needed to do more consultation around this issue. Now, I know what people are going to say. They have to cut somewhere, and yes, I agree with that. But they could have cut things that don't affect the most vulnerable. Their campaign was to help all New Zealanders, and this isn't really for the people that voted for them. Not what they're getting at the moment, in my opinion. Now that may change in the future, but at the moment, it's not really living up to the promises that they promise, because cutting transport funding and cutting disability funding isn't really helping all New Zealanders, in my opinion. And I don't know whether you agree or have a different opinion, but it doesn't really align with what they campaigned.
One of the things I found really interesting about Penny Simmons in particular and her response to questions around this is that she pulled out a lot of anecdotal evidence around things like, carers, for example, are getting manicures and paying for holidays and massages and stuff like that. Do you think that that kind of comment is accurate or harmful or problematic? How would you categorize something like that?
Well, it goes back to what Mr. Luxon said around, sorry to jump around here, but around what they're saying at the time of this recording around parents and, job seeker beneficiaries and so on and so on. It's only a select group. So, yes, some people were or allegedly are taking advantage of it, but it's only a select group. And I find it ironic that they target these select groups for food in schools, the parents and their truancy, etc., etc. And they talk about not wanting to do blanket approaches, but when it comes to the disability funding, they went the whole blanket approach that they said they wouldn't do. So it's like one thing for one group and one thing for another. And I don't want to say it, but it almost comes across as quite discriminatory.
That's got to be a hard position to be in for yourself, as somebody who works in the sector and deals with the sector on a day-to-day basis.
Well, just to be clear, I don't earn any money, I volunteer.
Okay, fair, very fair. Being involved in the sector, though, it sounds like a kind of scary place to be at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm in and around the sector is what I would say. I'm involved in it. Yeah, I'm involved. I say in and around is how I would phrase it. So, as of this, as of talking to you, I'm meeting with the Labour leader Chris Hipkins on the 12th at a local office here where I live. And the idea is to get hopefully a group of advocates and maybe even former ministers and current, and opposition cabinet involved. But there's negotiation ongoing at the moment. We'll see how that plays out. I'm happy to keep you posted, so you can mention it on future live streams and future video clips. And I'm happy to come back on and film a clip with you or whatever as time goes on. But so that's the plan at the moment. The initial suggestion was to go straight to the minister, but I talked to my team and my family, because my family helped me with the advocacy as well, mainly my grandmother. So I go to her for advice, and that other gentleman that I was talking about that I did with the podcast earlier, even though he lives in a different town, he gives me advice, and a couple of other people, and they all said, no, we shouldn't go to the minister right away. We should get, have a meeting, see where to go to from here, and that sort of thing. They all didn't feel that going straight to the minister was really appropriate. Yes, eventually, but not full blown right away, as it wouldn't be as effective sending an email. Because if we were to do that, she would probably just, I'm assuming here, by the way, she would just brush it off and go, oh, just another email of somebody complaining. So
MPs get millions of those every year. Just people complaining
But
about everything. So
even
I think the idea of an advocacy group is a really strong way to get your voices heard.
even though I appreciated the idea of going straight to the minister from the source, I didn't feel it was an appropriate cause of action, in my opinion. Now, some people watching this may agree or disagree, but that's just how I felt for how I want to run what I want to run.
Fair enough. Right. One last question for you on a slightly different topic. You posted recently about StarJam needing $100,000 in funding to do what they do. Do you want to give us a bit of a rundown on what StarJam do and the importance of what they do?
I'm just to be clear, I'm not involved in it, but
Mhm.
I've agreed to share the campaign and what have you. So they are a organisation that run concerts and music workshops for people with disabilities, and that I think they meet a couple of times a week, and they, eventually build up to doing several recitals a year. And unfortunately, the CEO announced yesterday that, in a statement, that they are looking for $100,000 in the next 2 weeks. Otherwise, because of due to cost of living pressures, otherwise they may have to cease operations. So immediately I went on the LinkedIn page. You can find me on there. We'll talk about that in a second. So I immediately went on the LinkedIn page, shared it with my contacts, and offered my support, and got a nice message back from her at the time of, no, we're doing this. So that was really good. And hey, I may do a quick video with her, but that's yet to be determined. We'll wait and see.
Good plan. We'll also put the link to that in the description as well. So if anybody wants to jump along and support that, they can. Blake, thank you very much for joining me. People know that you're in the chats at the moment having a follow because very busy social life, busier than mine on a Sunday night by the sounds of it. And I've always wanted to do this. So I'm going to throw back to Paul in the studio on this one. So I will catch you later. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thankful. Pleasure.
So I want to thank Blake again for joining me for this, and I'm going to catch up with him again as this evolves and we find out what's going on. Just for the record, though, Penny Simmons knew about the issues with funding back in December 2023, and it was only this last couple of weeks that it's come to light. And that's really, really not a great way when it comes to communicating to pretty much anybody. Now, speaking of communication, I've actually got my next guest lined up already because Michael is brilliantly early. I'll bring him in now. Kia ora, Michael. How are you?
Hey, kia ora, Paul. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, yeah, getting there. Busy night. This is my first weekend off in a while, so it makes a nice change. It's been, there's no concerts or movies on that I have to go to, so it's
Brilliant.
It's been good.
It's nice to have a good break like that.
Absolutely. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone? Let everyone know what your expertise is.
Yeah,
you wrote
kia
it up
ora.
far better than I.
Well, that's the public relations aspect in me. So my name's Michael. I am currently doing my PhD at AUT. I've had a varied career. I spent 20 years working in this media, primarily and the broadcast side of things, so working in places like 3 News, Newshub, 1 News, and then also after leaving there and doing my masters, I spent 3 years working for Open Council doing communications, publicity, and then also was involved in helping politicians, both local and central government politicians, in their response to the Auckland storms and the cyclone recovery that happened over the last year.
So a bit of experience.
Yeah, varied, but a bit of experience in comms, definitely.
It's one of the reasons I wanted to chat to you. I've tried to get 28 people on this show today to talk about public transport, and I've got 7 responses that were all the same. I can't talk about it because the government's watching, and I'm scared if I say something, I'm not going to get funding. Is that normal? Is that...
No.
Okay.
That's not normal. Look, the thing that I think we need to remember is that we are in a democratic country. We vote governments in, but we also have the right to be able to critique them, to be able to speak into areas that we're expert in, and to let our public know where things are at. I mean, obviously, there are certain things that you can't. I know people who work around planning and stuff like that, and they just can't say a lot. But there should never be a situation where somebody should feel afraid of speaking out, particularly when it comes to funding. There is nothing that a government should be doing around making people afraid and stopping them speaking out. And to be quite honest, it's a bit alarming because this is not what a liberal democracy is about.
What are the risks of our public servants not being able to talk?
I think it really cuts to the heart of our democracy because if you can't speak out, and particularly if you can't have people like whistleblowers letting the public know what's going on, then and particularly if there's untoward behaviour by the politicians that were elected, then we don't have a democracy. I don't want to be fear-mongering or alarmist, but that's the reality. If people cannot speak out, and if journalists can't question what's going on in our political sphere, whether that's local government or central government, then we don't have a democracy. And we should all be alarmed if public servants are responding to requests to be interviewed with comments around, I'm afraid I'm going to lose funding. And the thing that alarms me about that is that this particular government seems to be, what's the word to use, seems to be quite different to previous governments in terms of being almost like a bully boy.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard different ministers within this government sit there and threaten pre the election. You think about Winston Peters' threat at that time on Q&A. That was quite alarming. He is now our Deputy Prime Minister. We've heard David Seymour, something similar. He is our Deputy Prime Minister in waiting. These are not the actions these are the actions people should not be undertaking. And I did a quick search before I came on, and you have to go back to 2017 where there was a little bit of a furore around the then MP Alfred Nio threatening to withhold funding. And that's a bit of an alarm to me because it's not okay for that kind of thing to be happening. There is no way that anyone should be being forced to keep quiet.
How much of this messaging then is coming from those coalition partners, do you think? Because it's obviously a bit of a three-headed monster. David and Winnie are very good at sucking the oxygen out of the room when it comes to messaging. Do you think that is that a problem for National and for the Prime Minister? And is that a problem for everybody who's out there dealing with the repercussions?
I think there is an inherent problem with what you're talking about in terms of Winston and David Seymour sucking the oxygen out. I was just saying the other day to a friend of mine, I heard more from our Associate Minister for Education, i.e. David Seymour, than I have from our Minister of Education, Eric Stanford.
Who is the Minister of Education?
Yeah, it's previous governments, you would hardly hear from the associate minister for whatever. They would step in when the normal minister wasn't available. By and large, we would hear from the ministers themselves. I remember when John Key was Prime Minister, he fronted a lot of stuff. But with this government, I think Luxon has actually let the ball drop here, because he's letting his minority party coalition leaders dictate the rule. He needs to step up a bit more, I think, because he's the Prime Minister. At the end of the day, whether he like or not, he is the Prime Minister of the nation. He is the number one person at the top of that tree of this coalition government. Any decision that is made, he needs to front up on, or he needs to be available. He can't do this corporate speak, I'm going to palm it off to a manager. He needs to front up. And as comfortable as that may be for him, that's the role of the Prime Minister, to then fob it off and go, that's not my responsibility. That is your responsibility. You're the leader of this, as others have referred to it, three-headed monster. In terms of the alarming nature, like the start of your question, I don't know whether it would necessarily be overt. What I would imagine happening is that they have created an atmosphere of fear. And we noticed that from the start of the election campaign. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get rid of people. And you notice it with the cuts that are happening in the public service. I was trying to tally up how many cuts, and I lost count, but I can imagine that we're getting up over 1,000 people losing their jobs in Wellington alone. Now, that's a huge consequence for the Wellington sector, but also Wellington in general, because every single one of those public sector workers are hard-working Kiwis who pay their bills, who go to the cafes to have a coffee, who are propping up hospitality, who are propping up supermarkets, paying their bills, paying mortgages. And when you're suddenly taking that many people out of a sector, it then sort of creates this thing of what's going to happen, where are they going to go? But then it also creates a fear for those that are left, in terms of, if I speak out, am I going to get shoulder tapped and asked to leave? So I can't imagine they're doing this overtly. They're being really open and honest about this and going, keep quiet. But it's that subtlety and those threats that we saw on TV from the likes of Winston Peters and from the likes of David Seymour, that create this atmosphere of fear that then makes people go, second guess themselves. And that's quite alarming.
It is. How does that then fit in with what's happening to Newshub, for example? Because obviously they know there's a bit of an end date on what they're doing, and they seem to have come out of that news swinging the bat a little bit more. But obviously if people aren't wanting to talk to them or are fearful of going public, what does that do for our media landscape, where you're losing that voice and losing people who are fearful of actually talking?
Well, it creates an atmosphere where we no longer have that really healthy fourth estate. The thing that's really important is that we've got to have a healthy fourth estate, where media are able to challenge and question those in power, whether that's politicians, business owners, corporates, for the benefit of the populace. We can't do it ourselves. That's why we've got journalists. The problem that we've got in this country is the media sector has been eroded over decades, and way keep propping the company up or keep the company, keep the lights on, has been to make job cuts, and it's been very easy just to go and just get rid of a whole lot of journos. And so the newsrooms have been stripped completely. And so the ability to be able to do long form investigations, particularly in broadcast news where I spent a lot of time, was reduced and has been reduced. And now what we're doing is with the loss of Newshub, where I worked for 10 years, is we're losing one of those places where people can go to who are concerned. What happens what happens to a person who is concerned about a particular action that's, say, somewhere in like Auckland Transport here in Auckland, or something down at the Ministry of Business Innovation and I think Enterprises, MB, and they hear something or come across something or actually experience something where the minister is not doing their job, is overstepping the mark, they try and reach out to say news. They don't have a success with that, and they don't have a success with New Zealand Herald. Well, maybe the next thing that they were thinking of going to was Newshub. If Newshub doesn't exist anymore, then the opportunities for those stories to come out is significantly reduced. Also, there's a sense of trust. If you've worked with another journalist, if you've worked with a journalist before, you're more likely to trust them, and you're more likely to go back to them or offer them stories. That was my experience when I was pitching stories for Auckland Council. I would regularly go back to journalists that I had worked with in the past because we had built a relationship. Relationship is so key. If that journalist is no longer there, you might be a little bit apprehensive about reaching out to somebody that you don't know. And so it has a huge sort of ongoing effect. It's almost like, losing Newshub, we've dropped a pebble in the lake and the ripples are spreading. And we think, oh, it's just going to be sort of, that's affected. No, it's affecting the whole of society. And that's a concern. And I think it's something that we need to be, we should have been having this serious conversation about how we fund our journalists 15 years ago. And there were some that were to speak up and they were ignored. And now when push comes to shove, we're losing one of our best news organisations that we've had for the last 30 years. And it's a real tragedy for the media sector, for those that have, given blood, sweat, tears to that place for the sake of doing good journalism. It's also really tragic for our democracy and our society.
Because it's Newshub, and you've got TVNZ cuts as well, and cuts are coming through to other media platforms like Stuff. Does that embolden an organisation like the government, like the current government at the moment, where they're sitting there going, we won't be held to such a high level of account because they can't do it. They don't have the capability of doing it.
Yes, and in a short form, yes. But to unpack a little bit more, it's not just about going, oh, we're going to be able to get away with this. It's, and this is the conversation that should have been had about the media, is also the rise of the idea of expert panels. Now, for those that maybe don't follow news talk, I know it can be very hard, but Heather Duplessis-Allen regularly has Jordan Williams on. Jordan Williams is the head of the Taxpayer Union, which is a very right-wing think tank. There are some very various questions that have been asked by academics, both here in New Zealand and overseas, around the connection between Williams and places like the Atlas Network. Now, I have personally had interactions on social media with Jordan where he's attacked me because I have been involved in asking those questions. Who is this Atlas Network? What do you do? Why are you so afraid of this? Say that you've got this. And this is a network that David Seymour has connections with, but for some reason, this year he started to deny those connections. And when Ngātarangi Forbes asked him over the Waitangi weekend if there were any connections between ACT and Atlas, he said no, which is a blatant lie, because he himself he did one of their so-called mini MBAs and was in photos that were in their year of review in 2008, and he's working for another right-wing lobby group, think tank, from Canada, and one of the roles that that group had was to support the oil industry in terms of fighting against Indigenous rights so that they could mine the tar sands up in Canada. So you got all these things going on, and so now, because what's happened with our media is they've been ripped, we've had the heart ripped out of them, and so in order to fill the void and to fill the airtime, we have to get in people like Jordan Williams on, and they come across as meant to be expert, but they're coming in with an agenda, and they're coming in with a very extreme right agenda, where they are not going to be friendly to Indigenous people. They want to cut all red tape and or all bureaucracy. So anything around, we think about the housing crisis that we had with the leaky homes a few years ago. That was because we got rid of all the red tape around standards. That's what will happen if these people are allowed to carry on. And Jordan Williams is the kind of person that will be laying the ground to make it okay. And then the politicians come in on top and they're like, the ground's been tilled, we can plant our seeds and nobody's going to question it. So they're not isolated, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And it can get really convoluted when you start to think about it, because it's just ongoing. It becomes like, I think I heard it described that this is like a big web, and it's just this interwoven. And that's what happens with all of these things in society. They're not isolated. They are intimately intertwined.
As somebody who is on the inside of the media production side of things, do you see it there while you're in it, going, well, if we put this person on here, it's sort of feeding into this particular issue, and it might be leaning towards this bias or laying the foundations for somebody's talking point to do this down the line?
No. The reality is, particularly in terms of broadcast media, often what you're doing is you're trying to fill the gap, fill the blank space, the blank air, or in the likes of television, cover the black. You've got an hour of black cover, because you don't want nothing going out. Something's got to go out, and you've got to pay the bills. And so you need to have these breaks. So when I think about Newshub, that's an hour-long news show currently until it closes. And I'm using this as an example because that's my experience. It's actually 42 minutes of news, because 80 minutes is commercials, advertising. They got to pay the bills. So so that's what you've got to cover. 42 minutes. How do you fill it? Now it gets even more challenging when you look at places, when you look at shows like Breakfast and AM. They're on for 3 hours. They've got to constantly fill. But what you've got, and so they're just looking for people that can speak, and sometimes it's last minute, and it's who's available. What you've got, these lobbyists, is they're constantly communicating with the story producers and constantly communicating with these people, and then they're saying, I'm available, which is why, or my client's available, which is why for a long time we saw Don Brash as almost the go-to person in terms of speaking on Māori issues. Now, I left TV3 at this stage, and I challenged my colleagues about this, and I got a bit of a pushback against that. And all I was saying is, like, look, there are plenty of Māori academics, there are plenty of Māori economists in this. why are you constantly going to the rich white guy for comment on Māori issues? You know he's racist. But that whole thing of he's available, you know, that's who's on the card, because that's what's constantly being fed to me. And you're constantly trying to fill 3 hours of content, and, you know, you've just had to interview fall over. It's suddenly like, oh, you've got to scramble. Having worked in with what you've done, you get this, you know, you are kind of needing to scramble at times. So yeah, having people like the Jordan Williams, like the Don Rashers available on hand, is it easy, because it's one less thing that you've got to worry about. Oh, yeah, they're available. But the problem is that they come in with an agenda. They are going to deliberately speak and spread negative stuff and misinformation. And it's because we just don't have the journalists being able to do their job properly, because it's just they're so under constraint, because there's just not enough resource and manpower to make sure you do things properly, to make sure that you check those things properly.
I suppose as well, if you're doing a last minute replacement, it's a morning show, so you've got what, 9 minutes to talk to somebody. You don't have the time to do the research on everything that they've done and said and their opinions and views. It's basically, here are the notes, here's who you're talking to, we're on in 3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that for a lot of those ones, they actually have line-up producers the night before, but they're working their butts off trying to get hold of all the people and confirm, and that's when they go, oh no, there's nothing confirmed. Now, sometimes that'll mean a scramble that night, but sometimes they won't be able to solve that, and it's a scramble in the morning. Either way, it's really messy, and like you say, there's no chance of being able to fact check. When I worked in public relations, and I think public relations people do an incredible job, and I see public relations people and media of two sides of the same coin, and a good comms person or a good public relations person is looking at telling a good story and working with journalists and helping journalists, you know, tell good stories, but also tell the truth. And so when people stuff up, a good public relations person says, actually, you've got to own this. You've got to front up, own it. However, because that particular sector has not been regulated for a long time, and should be regulated, you have actors in that situation where that'll just step in, and they're not going to act ethically. They're not going to abide by the code of ethics that people who are part of the Public Relations Institute of New Zealand are going to abide by. And so they'll turn around and they'll push the misinformation, and they'll celebrate when their story gets out verbatim. What they put out on press release gets retold verbatim. That's a huge win for them. And I did experience this as, you know, even though my personal ethics meant that I was always set to tell truthful, honest stories. Yes, there was a positive light about it, and the whole aim was to get people to feel proud of living in Auckland and what amazing stuff is happening in Auckland. But there was a bit of an alarm when I saw a couple of stories that I pitched almost go in newspapers verbatim, because it showed that the journalist is overworked and doesn't have the time to do the research and fact check, or also do an alternative voice. And so to me, that was, you know, a little alarm bell. It's almost like canary in the coal mine thing. They're underpaid, overworked, and, you know, the trust in our media and then the trust in our politicians gets eroded over time.
How do you think we fix it? Is there a way to fix it at this point? Easy question for you to finish off. How do we fix this massive problem?
Oh, look, there's no easy solution. I would love to say, look, we just need to fund our journalists more. But, you know, with what Labor did under the previous government with the Public Interest Journalism Fund, well, the conspiracy theorists got hold of that and said, oh, this is a big bribe. And that ended up in the politicians, and they love to push it because that was a good way to attack the government. Actually, if you looked into it and you looked at how it was organized, how it was set up, and all the structures. I'm currently doing not only doing a PhD, but I'm also teaching at AUT. Some of my colleagues at AUT were part of the working group that were then checking and making sure that everything was all okay. There were checks and balances through that public interest journalism fund. It was great. It was a really good thing to help journalists, help our media outlets. But the conspiracy theorists got hold of it, and that sort of narrative took over. Now, I think we need to have a serious conversation around how do we fund things. I would like to say public funding. I think there is a serious conversation that should have happened a long time ago, but it's never too late to have that conversation because it's only going to get worse. But we need to talk about Google, Facebooks, all those people. How do we tax them? And maybe we take a percentage of that and we set it aside that, NZ On Air covers it, or the press council, so that there is that feeling for good journalism to occur. But we've got to make sure that is seen. I know that it's separated from the decision makers. We need to make sure that our public, our New Zealanders, average Kiwis, see that it's separate, because otherwise it just buys into this whole thing of it's just a bribe. But I think that's one way forward. Plus, also, we need to challenge our politicians. And what I want to say to anyone who's asked to speak on things, and never be afraid. Fear is the thing that's going to kill our democracy. Democracy is a precious, beautiful thing that we have, and we exercise it not once every 3 years, but every day. And yes, we have the big decision that we make when we vote every 3 years, but also we can speak out, we can protest, we can do referendums, we can sign petitions. There are lots of things that we can do to say this is not okay. Write to our local MP, write to the opposition, say what you're doing, write to the government. What you're doing is not okay. Write to the opposition, say, hey, look, here's some things that I'm concerned about. Can you say? The opposition is that first line of defence in terms of making sure that there is a sense of accountability, but then the media come behind, and we need to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable to be able to talk to the media so that we hold those in power to account.
Perfect. I think that's a brilliant place to finish this off. Thank you very much, Michael. It was brilliant catching up with you. Are you in Mount Roskill next weekend?
I am in Mount Roskill next weekend.
Okay, I will probably catch you there.
That'll be World of Cultures.
World of Cultures, yeah. A Culture Fest.
A fantastic opportunity to interact and mingle with an amazing array of people groups and cultures that make up Auckland.
I hate the food stalls because I can't decide what I want. There's just so many options.
I just love watching the dancing and just but also the joy on people's faces. I think is fantastic.
Oh yeah, it'll be brilliant. I will catch you there then.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paul.
No worries, Michael. Thank you.
All right. See you.
Yeah. So that was Michael Bain. As you probably picked up, we actually used to do some work together with Auckland Council after he did a whole bunch of work with everybody else. But I think it's a really good place for us to wrap up because it's almost 9 o'clock. It's been an hour. I want to thank Michael and Blake for joining me tonight. These are really important issues that I think we all need to take a focus on and pay attention to with what's going on around us. And if we don't, that's when things start to slip through the cracks. That's when you start to see messages come through from people that are, kind of scary. Things like this, which is actually something I got sent today, or so this one here, which I got sent a couple of weeks ago. And these are all from people who work within government, who are really concerned about speaking out, who have really important things that they need people to know, but they can't say anything because they're scared at the moment of what that actually means. So we all need to be really super concerned about that. Now, again, want to thank Michael and Blake for joining me tonight. And other than that, I'm going to wrap everything up here. Thank you very much, everybody who joined for the stream. Don't forget to like and share and subscribe. And this will be available for podcast tomorrow, and the video should be processed all fairly soon. Until next time, ka kite anō. Have a fantastic night, everybody.